tell if this is working. Can you hear me out there okay? Nobody's saying yes. Thank you. Let's start out with honesty, okay? You be honest with me. I'll try not to lie to you too much. We aren't stealing a lot of your southern employees in Minnesota this time of year. We just got our first 10 inches of snow up there. Is there anybody other than the people I met at breakfast from Minnesota here today? Oh, great. I hope you don't know who I am. Gosh darn it, I was going to be able to get away with so much stuff until I saw you people. Yeah, you got a little introduction about who I am and the fact that I have some employees all over the country that do nutrition work for cows. The truth of the matter is, do I have a clicker? Oh. This is really about you and not about me. One of my favorite lines from a good old movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, one of my favorite comedians, Steve Martin, says to the big guy who kind of acts like he's from Minnesota, hey, when you tell your little stories, try to have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener. So I tend to get storytelling a little bit, and I hope it's not too boring, and occasionally I do have to put numbers up there, even though I hate to do that. But hopefully by before 10 o'clock, because I know you have to board buses, and I might even get done a little bit early, hopefully I'll have given you a point or two to take home. Gal, it's fascinating, because it's not the first time it's happened to me to be speaking at the same meeting with Jorge, and I'm excited to be up here because at least the stuff I'm going to be talking about, we have a little bit of control over. Man, that must be scary, not having control over something. You know, despite this cow's effort to demand to be called number 822, no matter what she did, all the employees on the dairy called her music. Okay? And she just didn't have any control over that. Anybody nervous about being in the dairy industry? Let's see. How should I ask that so that when you don't raise your hand, that's a positive response? Anybody not nervous about being in the dairy industry? You know, one thing that and I don't do this very often, I don't get up in front of groups that often and speak, but the one thing it taught me is being nervous isn't a bad thing. Because every time I have to get up in front of a group of people, I get a little bit nervous. And what I've noticed a time or two when I didn't get nervous, I didn't do a very good job. So being nervous is okay. What makes us nervous is change, I think. And there's whole seminars on change and how to deal with it and how to embrace it. There's some things that sort of stay consistent in the dairy industry, but as long as I've been involved in it, and it's continuing until today, there's moving targets. And one of the things that helps you people be survivors, and me be a survivor, is we're not completely ignorant of that, and we're willing to adjust to those moving targets. How many of you were at this Pure Mycogen Peer seminar last year? I was the only one here. The reason they told me I could come back and give the same talk is because none of you were here last year. But I noticed that as I sat down, I thought this was going to be easy. I'm just going to sit down. Let me see. Go find that PowerPoint. Talk about that same slide. I just have to change 2006 to 2007. And it'll be easy. Truth of the matter is, I started thinking about all the things that have happened just on this one little topic of corn silage in the last year, and I was sitting down at my computer last night changing things. Things have changed. The other thing I hate about nutrition talks is all the numbers, and I'm guilty of it later on. I apologize. I'll try to skip over those real fast and just give you the take-home message. So once upon a time, a few years ago, I just decided to come up with a little more comfortable visual. Anybody guess what we're going to do with these 56 squares? Pardon me? Sudoku. That's good. That's good. Well, crossword puzzle isn't the right answer either. What do you think the 56 squares represent? Nutrients, he says here. The pounds of milk I get on my dairy right here, he says. No, that's not it. I know some of you are... No, he didn't say that. He said balancing a ration. That's right. You know, I know a lot of you probably think that balancing a ration happens in some other world inside a special computer. Goodness knows the people that write in the magazines about nutrition make it seem so secretive and complex that you can't possibly understand all the little solutions that make your cows healthy. It's really not that complicated. And I had to do this once. I was on the spot. Didn't have a computer with me. Was at a dairy, needed to make a ration change. This is several years ago, and now I can do it a lot better. All I got to remember is that I've got 56 pounds of dry matter intake in this example, in a high group. My job is to decide what goes in there. You know, maybe it's 50 pounds for a heifer group. 56 works nice because it makes a square for all you math majors out there. We're going to talk about the 56 squares a little bit better. And instead of showing you rations, we're going to look at squares. Ought to be pretty simple. Milk isn't all that complicated. It's just water and some nutrients. Oh, yeah, you can tell I spent a little bit of time in Wisconsin, can't you? Anybody here from Wisconsin? Yeah. Milk isn't that... I forgot about that picture. Milk isn't that complicated. It doesn't look like that either. You all know that. It's mostly water, and it's a pretty consistent supply of minerals and proteins and energy in the terms of lactose or fat. Shouldn't be that hard to fill in some squares and make a bunch of milk on a consistent basis. Don't want to turn this into too much of a sales pitch, but what I do, the way I get paid is I fill in less than a tenth of a pound of one of those squares. All of my clients buy from me a trace mineral pack that's fed at 0.08 pounds per head per day. I don't have ties to the other 55.9 squares. And that's important in today's meeting because I want to make you understand that once I've gotten paid, now I can objectively decide how to help my producers fill those other, basically all 56 squares. I don't have any ties to proteins or energy sources or grain mixes or protected fats or whatnot. Now, I made it sound simple. Just going to put some stuff in the squares, and there you go. There's your ration. Let her buck. The truth of the matter is, while we're filling these squares, and this is, I think, where the term balancing comes in, we've got to make sure that we've got a lot of things taken care of. We need some fiber in there for room and mat. We need some digestible fiber in there, because the products of digestible fiber make milk fat. We need different kinds of proteins in there, some of them degradable to feed the rumen bugs. If there's not enough of those, we need some bypass proteins in there. We need different forms of carbohydrates to feed the bugs, to make all the things that are in the milk. Hopefully, when we fill all those squares and we've got all the right combinations and the right balances, then we've got something we can present to the cow's intestine that she'll digest that'll result in all the protein and energy she needs, all the energy she needs for body weight in the calf, and all those things. Just one quick point. You know how we always hear how important dry matter intake is? As long as we're talking in this context, all the things we've got to accomplish, all the energy we've got to provide, all the protein we've got to provide, what if you give me 6 less squares to deal with? Makes my job harder, doesn't it? That's why intake's important. You can accomplish your goals easier if you've got more squares to deal with. I want to talk about the rumen. for a minute. This is where the nutritionist in me gets on his high horse. I think sometimes our industry has forgotten this. This is the unique organ to the ruminant. It's the biggest organ. It's what makes cows different from people. Believe me, if I want to design a program that guarantees that I'll gain 5 pounds a year, I can do it. It just means I eat a little bit of ice cream every night. I just add a little bit to my diet. I've got a simple digestive system. I'm going to gain weight. I've proved it. Cows are harder. Cows are tougher because in this rumen, we're feeding not the cow but a bunch of rumen microorganisms, and they in turn feed the cow. The one thing, when you tell your little story, try to have a point. The one thing I remember from graduate school is one day I was sitting around in a meeting talking about football statistics, and my major professor was disgusted. He says, "You guys can remember all these football statistics. How come you can't remember anything about nutrition?" We said, "Well, what do you want us to remember?" And he said, "Remember this. About 70% of the nutrition that a cow gets is because of what you feed the rumen bugs. It's not bypass protein. It's not bypass fat. It's not bypass anything. It's what you provide that rumen in terms of fiber and starch that actually makes protein. Makes 70% of the energy that the cow uses." So, I get a little tired of it. And there was a spell there in my industry where all we talked about was bypass nutrients. Let's talk about the rumen just a little bit. It's a huge, huge organ. One of the tasks I had to do in grad school once was take cannulated cows, empty out all the contents that was in a rumen, and measure it when cows are on different diets. And it always amazed me at the size of the 50-gallon drum we could fill up with the contents in a cow's rumen. There's so many rumen microbes in that rumen, I'm not even sure if all those zeros are right, but there's billions of them. And a lot of what we feed, we actually feed to those bugs. We're not feeding the cow, we're feeding bugs. It's those bugs that digest fiber. We're going to talk a lot about fiber. And it's sort of meant to be. You ask, well, isn't part of what we're supposed to be doing is bettering people's lives? Yeah. You think it's meant to be that we're supposed to be growing rumen bugs when the amino acid balance of rumen bugs is exactly what's in milk? I think that's the way we're supposed to make milk. Not with bypass nutrients, but with rumen bugs. 56 squares, all kinds of different feedstuffs. We're going to talk about them in a second. I made this up last year. I call it the Randy Moss rule. Never choose a feedstuff to accomplish one goal if it will negatively impact the associative power of the diet. How many of you do not know who Randy Moss is? He's a wide receiver, played last night on television, extremely talented player.
And the Green Bay Packers passed him up and shouldn't have.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about change. The Packers passed on him because he looked like he was a great talent that would have negative impact on the team. Now, last year this was beautiful because he stunk with the Vikings, he stunk with the Raiders. Every team he went to suffered. They just went in the tank like they were cursed. Well, a little change. Change a little faster than I could change my PowerPoint, in fact. Looks like he's going to be a nice addition to the latest team he's added to. I put this up, you know what my favorite example in nutrition is about the Randy Moss rule? Fat. Fat's got more energy than anything else you can feed, right? Your cows are short of energy, they're thin, they're not milking enough. You ought to be able to add fat and fix it, right? Why doesn't it work? It starts to do bad things. It's a good thing on paper all by itself. But when it starts to negatively affect the fiber in the diet, the making of protein by the rumen bugs themselves, the whole factory kind of shuts down a little bit. What happens? You go backwards. You're not supposed to say DA when we're at meetings like this. Everybody's going to get out their cell phone now and get nervous. Thank goodness for cows and nutritionists who need to stay employed. We've got forages as a major part of this puzzle. You know, I don't run into too many hog and poultry nutritionists because they just do one diet in their whole lifetime, then they have nothing to do. But these forages keep me employed, keep life challenging for us. That's a Minnesota corn silage pile in nicer weather. Let's look at our squares. It's the same. I filled up our squares quickly for you here because we got to get moving. We're going on a tour. This is typical of a Midwest diet, maybe. Anybody in here work for a feed company? Okay. Well, I'm not. It's all about honesty, like I said. I'm just going to be truthful with you. You know, when we came to the Midwest, this is pretty much typical Midwest diet. About half forage. Guy who grows his own high moisture corn, the feed company sells him about 20 pounds of feed. And we think he buries lots of little costs in there that producers don't need to pay. That's why we have some clients nowadays, because we don't do that. Average typical diet. Half forage, half grain. Even if you look at my version, the consultant's version, half forage, half grain. These grains are things that my producers now buy directly from brokers, though. They may or may not still grow some of their own corn. Some corn gluten feed pellets, some cottonseed. Most of my clients live close to a cheese plant where they all feed whey. We buy a little bit of protein every year, whether it's soybean meal or canola or linseed. And then we bid out a mineral mix that's about 3 pounds. All the little goodies go in the mineral mix from a local mill. That makes sense, everybody? Typical diet. 50% forage, 50% grain. What happens if we have bad forage? Anybody ever balanced a diet? It doesn't take you long to figure out. You can do it. You can balance a diet. But the worse your forage is, the less of it you have room for in those 56 squares, or the whole thing's not going to work. That's why you sample forages. This is what your nutritionist does. If all of a sudden you got some number 2 hay instead of number 1, it shifts that whole diet to more grain, less forage. You cross your fingers. You're good cow people. You keep an eye on cows, and things probably go fine. You can do it. But you all know that the more grain you feed, the more costly it's going to be for you. Particularly Midwest, where we grow some of our own forages and buy our grains, if you'll sort of accept that premise for a minute. I can probably even make the case that if you buy all your feed, you're still in this boat where grain's more expensive. It's certainly more risk to the cows. We've all seen the risk or the realities of lower fat tests, particularly in the summer. And it's a long-term bummer if your feet go bad. These things can have some momentum and they can be scary. What if we have good forage? Simple concept, but this is the reality. When we sit down on our fancy computers and generate rations, you got good forage, and I mean, sometimes we don't even listen to the computer and we just keep pushing the forage, and it's amazing to me, when you really have good forage, how much forage you can feed. And cows continue to do extremely well. Less grain, less expense, and a lot less risk. Some little side benefits. Today we're worried about employees and immigration law. This one's sort of been looming over us for a while. Nutrient management. How much feed are we importing versus growing? The more we grow, the more nutrients we can recycle, either on our own land or those contract growers that work with us. We need to try and grow as much of our nutrients as possible. And it's going to get more important in the future. Everybody's heard this thumb rule. That's why dry matter intake is so important. 1 pound of dry matter intake will get you 2 to 3 pounds of milk. It's not the dry matter intake that does it. It's the digestible dry matter. It's no good if it's not digestible. Cows don't get any ribbons for dry matter intake. They get ribbons for digestible nutrients. I'm going to talk about digestibility a little bit. It's been 10 years since I started sampling corn silages and wondering, why aren't these what they should be? And for some reason, somebody started looking at NDFD, fiber digestibility. And I measured that on a bunch of corn silages in the late 90s. And I measured ADF. You know why ADF? You know what ADF is? It's acid detergent fiber. And you know what they use it for? They use it to calculate net energy. It's the only thing that's measured to calculate net energy, at least in the late 90s. So they'd measure your ADF, and if it was low, you'd have a high-energy corn silage, and if it was high, you'd have a low-energy corn silage. That's all they did. You think energy is some fancy thing? It was just a conversion from using a mathematical formula using ADF. And what was interesting is that the fiber quality, depending on whether you had a low ADF or high ADF, varied. Couldn't tell. You couldn't tell from the standard test on corn silage what you had for forage quality. So that began a whole decade for me and the people in my group of sampling corn silages and have them tested for fiber digestibility. And a couple interesting things off this slide. This goes all the way back to the late 90s. Samples we took from our clients' farms. Our clients volunteered to pay for these samples because they were interested in how good of the forage was that they were feeding. Interesting to look at the trends on the BMR years ago. A few people, down to none. I mean, the standability was so bad, the experiences were so bad, people said, forget it. You guys go back to the drawing board and make this a little better so we can live with it, and we'll try it. Regardless of sort of the politics of corn silage, every year our top samples in fiber digestibility were BMR. And I'll probably say it later, but I want to throw it out now. NDF digestibility is forage quality. Period. That's the difference between a good forage and a bad forage. It isn't protein. It's fiber digestibility. How much energy can the cow get from the fiber in the forage? It either ends up as energy for her or manure. Which do you want it to be? Gets a little tricky is that in 2004 and 2005 we had a lot of people with blends. And the blends are hard to sample. So we'd get numbers all over the place for the blends. 2005, 9 out of the top 10 samples we pulled for fiber digestibility, for BMRs, the blends ranked fairly high out of 112 samples. I have so many samples in 2006, I'm probably not even going to do this anymore. If I summarize the non-BMRs with the BMRs and blends from the 05 crop year, you can see there's about a 10-point difference in NDF digestibility. And now the labs are starting to adjust the energy value based on those numbers. And it really doesn't matter what these are. You know, a lot of people use these numbers to decide how to fill their squares. I don't. You know, maybe this should be 70 and this should be 82. I don't care. I'm going to figure out how many squares I can fill with a highly digestible corn silage. And I'm going to push it until I find out that's it. There's a lot of fancy numbers out there, and a lot of fancy programs, and a lot of intimidating terminology. Usually, though, most solutions to things are simple and understandable. And if you sit down with a calculator and a notepad, you ought to be able to understand them and figure them out. Here's what feed costs. And this is what I had to update for this year. The black are my numbers from last year. Things have changed a lot on feed costs, haven't they? TMRs. I used to be able to get a TMR down to close to 5 cents per pound of dry matter in the Midwest. Won't come close to that now. That'd be $2.50 a cow a day. 2-3 years ago, I had a couple that were $2.60, $2.70. I don't even want to know what they are out west now per pound of dry matter. 11 cents? Jeepers. Cottonseed's up. Animal proteins are up. Blood meal's over $1,000 a ton at times. Plant proteins, soy plus, soy best, getting over $400 a ton. Roasted soybeans. Even corn, which we used to buy for $80 a ton in the Midwest, is 120, 140, 160 ground. What is it out west? Cornmeal? I'm still underballing this. The point I'm trying to make is, when you're going to fill, you got to fill those squares, right? You got to feed the cows. It's amazing to me how people are getting freaked out over an increase in the cost of corn silage, when even if I was to lay in front of you the most expensive corn silage you've ever seen in your life, it'd be the cheapest way to fill a square compared to this other stuff. You want to have good corn silage at this price, to the point where I could take cottonseed out of your diet? When cottonseed's $300 a ton? These are some of the questions we've started to ask ourselves in the last year, and some of the things we've started to do. And you can't even think about doing it if you don't have good forage. Here's a real example just to show you that my 3 to 4 to 5 cents per pound of dry matter is an accurate number in the Midwest. You want to ask a question? That's fine.
I was going to say, how much are you putting the cost of the corn silage on a per ton, 70%
Here you go.
moisture?
This should explain it. This should explain it. A couple years ago in the Midwest, we'd be able to get... now this is an example of conventional versus BMR. We are still probably getting some people on last year's contracts getting corn silage in the pile for 3.5 cents a pound of dry matter. $70 per ton of dry matter. 1/3 of that is $23 a ton.
That was how many years ago?
Well, there's still some from last year's contract that went in at that price this year.
Now, is that packed in the pit, or is that on the stump?
That's in the pile.
Wow. They double that for last. I was going to say, we're 33, 35.
Yeah, I understand that.
And that's non-BMR.
Yeah.
If you got a BMR, it's going to be another $4.
Now, does that include shrink or not?
Oh God, who knows about shrink? We ignore that. No, that does not include shrink.
Okay.
Most of our guys buy it out of the field or in the field. They give me their numbers for what they've got into it, packing it and covering it, which probably is underestimated at times. So the point is whether let's just take the Midwest example, where we want to call this 4 and go up to 4.6 for BMR. The point is, it's still anything around 5 cents per pound of dry matter. It's all relative. It's still going to be your cheapest way to fill a square. And if it allows you to eliminate some expensive squares, it might be the smartest decision you ever made. Here's what's happened to me in the last year for Moving Target. I convinced myself, I convinced my consultants, I convinced clients that highly digestible forage is a great thing. Everybody agreed. Figured it'd be a no-brainer. Be easy to convince all my clients to plant all BMR. Didn't happen. Well, actually it did, but it happened with some struggles that I didn't expect. I kept getting these ridiculous comments back to me like, man, I'm having a hard time getting my growers to grow that stuff. Gosh, old Tom, he doesn't like that stuff. He thinks it's not as drought resistant as his old traditional varieties. I don't know if I can get him to grow it this year. The yield drag is just too much. You know, we're not even sure we're going to have enough feed. What are we going to do? I'm not sure we're going to plant all BMR this year. Real issues, real stumbling blocks. And, geez, months and months and months of struggling with it, and a couple of examples, and I think I'm finally onto it. I was putting this on my computer last night. Just within the last 2 weeks, one of my consultants works with one of Iowa State's satellite colleges. He's their nutritionist. And they have a board, not unlike a lot of dairies where there's multiple decision makers, and one brother's in charge of the dairy and the other one's in charge of the crops. Those are fun. And they were coming at Clint with this deal, hey, we're not, the yield is just not there. We're not going to be able to convince anybody to do the BMR. The board's not moving in that direction. So Clint sat down and did a couple of rations with them. So it really comes down to is those squares. For me, it's how do you fill those squares and what are the results of that and what are the economics of it? So Clint sat down and did them 2 rations with these assumptions, and these are not really assumptions. These are their prices. A couple $100 a bushel corn. A couple hundred bushels an acre corn. $3.60 a bushel for ground corn. $3.50 plus 10 cents grinding. Big difference in BMR cost versus conventional for yield and seed. I think that's fair. These are actually the numbers they provided him with. But that's what it's going to cost us. $35.50 a ton instead of $28. Big part of that is the 15+% yield drag they estimated. I didn't want to undersell this. I probably oversold it, the difference. I think you're going to be surprised at the example here. I want you to know that I use fair differences in cost, fair differences in yield, worst case scenario in comparing the two. Apologize in advance for missing out on the punchline here big time. This last column over here is the BMR column. I forgot to put that on my slide last night when I was updating this. This is the BMR column. This is the measurement. That's the conventional diet. Let's take a minute and go through that. What happens when you do a diet with conventional corn is the corn silage isn't as good. You can't put as much in the diet. Therefore, when you do a conventional diet and you add up the number of pounds, the number of tons per year you need per cow, it's not nearly as much as what you can do with a BMR. You can get more squares filled with BMR per cow. These are all on a per cow per year basis. What do you put in place of it? Corn. On the conventional diet, about 10 pounds of corn per cow per day. On the BMR diet, and this is a guy who's done a bunch of them, it's around 4 pounds per cow per day. This diet probably has some whey and some gluten feed in it, similar to what my example diet did. But there's a 6-pound difference in the amount of corn fed to these cows. If you look at the Midwest cost on those, the cost is less for the BMR diet. But it's not huge. And it's not the point of this slide. The point of this slide is to go back to those assumptions, figure out how many bushels per acre corn you get, know how many how many tons of corn silage you get, and this is the punchline. That, oh my gosh, this horrible, scary, expensive corn silage that I'm going to have to plant so much of. It's scary. I don't know if I can do that. I'm used to doing this, and I'm comfortable with it. I don't know if I can plant all that much more corn silage, almost double. 30, 40, 50% more. The number of acres that you'll need for corn and corn silage is less with the BMR diet. If you've been asleep for the whole talk, that's fine. This is the when you tell your little story, try to have a point. Everything on the surface feels like you're going to need more acres. And maybe in some cases you actually will, because you're a guy who buys your corn. But the economics are still such that I don't care if you buy your corn or grow it. It takes less acres to feed a BMR diet with less corn, more corn silage, than it does to feed a conventional, low digestibility corn silage diet with more corn. The reason for that is the tons per acre that you get when you feed corn are crap. They're so crap they more than cancel out a pretty significant assumed yield drag on BMR, corn silage. Everybody follow that? I didn't expect this. When I sat down with a real life example, I didn't expect the BMR scenario to beat the conventional scenario with that bottom line number. And for Midwest guys, this hits home. A New York guy called me the other day and said, if I go BMR, I'm not going to have 75 acres that I had in corn this year. I said, it isn't going to matter. You're not going to need as much corn. I got to sell that 75 acres. I said, it doesn't matter. You're going to be able to sell some other corn this year, even though that 75 acres is not in corn, it's in corn silage. You're going to still have leftover corn. Any questions or comments on that?
You're saying on this, you're not going to need as much corn silage?
No, I'm not saying that at all. And let's be clear about that, because there's a lot of numbers up here. This is one of those numbery slides. If you grow all your corn and corn silage to feed 500 cows today, you can actually get it done with less acres, going to a BMR scenario with a little reduced yield, because you'll need a lot less corn. Same number of acres. A heck of a lot more of it has to be in corn silage. 8.3 tons per cow per year versus 5.5. About 55% more corn silage acres.
Instead of the grain.
Right. Your grain corn goes down from, where's the acreage on it? Grain corn's about a third of what you're used to if you're growing all your corn, or if you're buying it. Now, keep in mind that, like I said, this is a diet with some gluten feed and some whey in it that's already displacing corn. So at most, it's a 10-pound of corn diet. If you're feeding 20 pounds of corn, don't expect the result to be 1/3 of that. You understand the difference there? It's a unique situation. The most this guy would ever feed with poor forage is 10 pounds because he's got some other commodities in there.
How much sugar would you have to offset the 40% lignin?
How much sugar would I have to offset the 40% lignin?
Conventional farming is non-digestible lignin.
Yep.
How much sugar are you going to add to that diet to offset that?
I don't think you can offset lignin. I mean, lignin is a part of that plant. If you look at the BMR samples versus the old conventional corn silages, the BMRs have less lignin. It's the glue that holds the fibers together. There's not an organism or an enzyme in mammals that'll digest that. So that's what makes that fiber end up in the manure and not in the cow. You can't offset lignin. You get too much lignin in forage, it's bad forages. It ends up in the manure and it slows down intake, period. You can add sugar till you're blue in the face. It's not going to fix lignin.
Makes their stomach hurt.
Okay, the other side of that is that's what you're buying conventional forage.
You're buying some of that. Yeah. You're buying some completely useless future the more indigestible your forage is.
Most of us that BMR corn don't have a problem being convinced it's the way to go. Repeat that.
I will.
Most of us,
Still talking.
okay. So that our problem isn't whether or not to plant BMR. Our problem is how do we go out and purchase BMR? What are your tricks to convince other growers to grow it for us?
The basic question is, most of us that have used BMR in support of it, the real challenge is now, and you're absolutely right, the challenge is now, what are your tricks to convince growers to grow it? Okay? And that is the challenge. And I've been happy with a couple people lately that have gotten it done because I've said the same thing to them. I've basically turned to my clients and said, you're smart, you got to figure this out. You understand the dynamics here. Okay? You're going to walk into a trap if you're just going to pay them X dollars per ton and that's it. Get creative. I think it's going to involve buying some of it by the acre with some, but then you got to have incentives in there for yield. And who's going to take the risk? Of course, there's risk in any crop, right? If you're paying them by the ton on the old system and they just bring as many darn tons as they want, there's risk in that one too. I don't have the answer for you on that today, but I'll tell you, that's what we're working on right now. I mean, that's what my clients are working on, and I'm only going to get it from them and regurgitate it back out to you next year. That's what we consultants do. We really never figure anything out on our own. We just steal it from one guy and give it to two others. But there have been people that have sat down and said, look, here's what your additional seed cost is. Here's what our expected yield situation is. That's, I don't expect you to carry that burden. Here's another $7 a ton. Maybe it's that simple. Maybe it's just cranking up the number. If you go to the next level, which we don't have time for today, and you take an extreme approach and you got a real good BMR, and you take out the cottonseed and some of the other expensive stuff that the digestible fiber from BMR gets you, you can afford to pay about $15 more per ton for that BMR. You don't want to do that. But that's how much it's worth. I've done that. And it's sort of a wild-ass guess. With some hard numbers on today's feed prices, we haven't seen what the cows will do on these diets, but I've got a good number of clients that did go 100% BMR. I told them we'd make it work. We've pulled 100% of the cottonseed out of the diet, added more BMR. So far, so good. These aren't 95-pound herds, but they're herds that want to be over 80.
I guess one of the comments I would have being an all BMR silage herd is that ultimately you may need some more acres
You all hear that over here? Ultimately, you might need more squares because the cows eat better. And you might need a few more acres because of it. Wouldn't disagree with that. The other economics of the maintenance cost of a cow and taking advantage of that and getting more intake, we'll worry about those problems later. That'll be a good problem to have. I appreciate that you appreciate that as well. That's not a big problem. Assuming the cows perform. I think there are times with BMR where it moves through the cows so fast, and one thing a good nutritionist knows is that fiber digestion doesn't happen like that. It takes time. It takes those rumen bugs time to digest fiber. So there's been times when I've had to slow down BMR diets, particularly if they're all haylage with corn silage. You've probably all done the same. And ironically, you use a very high lignin, poor quality forage called straw to slow the rest of it down. Any other questions? Got 10 minutes. We can quit early if you really want to get on the bus.
I did a little calculation of 8.3 tons of silage per cow per year. That's only 45 pounds.
That's right.
My ration right now goes to 60.
I did the same calculation right before I got up here because I didn't see the diets that my colleague did. I wanted to know what two numbers was he using here. And a lot of my diets are 60, 65. I'm sorry. The question was, I did the math. He did the math. That amount of silage per year is only 45 pounds of silage BMR has fed. It's not an extreme example at all. And the conventional is 30. That's pretty typical Midwest example for smaller herds. As you get into the bigger herds, I think the acres and the simplicity of forage management is such that we're at the 60 to 70 pounds of silage.
Then the numbers get better though, with more of the BMR silage in there. Well, I guess then the numbers even get more leaning towards BMR.
I was thinking the same thing, but I wasn't confident enough to say it. That probably the example gets better.
I can tell you it does.
The man with the high intakes over there says it gets better.
So what's your highest herd on pounds BMR corn in a ration?
I do, and the other thing is, since I'm in a square mentality, I fill all my squares with dry matter. And I honestly lose touch with how many pounds as fed my clients are feeding because they're responsible for the dry matters. So let's figure this out together. Probably 23 pounds of dry matter at 30% dry matter. So 23 divided by 0.3. They got that?
I had herds over the summer running 85 pounds of it.
I heard you guys were being hard on vets last night. Is that true? Was there any bad talk about nutritionists? At breakfast. Well, you know the nutritionist. Are there any vets in the audience today? Well, yeah, I know you though. You won't be hard on me. You know what the nutritionist joke is about vets? You know the difference between God and a vet? God doesn't think he's a vet. Question over here.
What's your thoughts on mixing BMR?
Oh, my.
Suggested you can.
I've done it a lot. My thoughts on mixing it are I've done it out of, all the reasons you guys know about. I kind of want to try it, but I don't want to go all the way. I haven't had any real problems with it. I haven't had the disaster. If you're looking for the, don't do that disaster story, blending it in the pile, separate piles, mixing it in the mixer.
Our constraint was always storage, and so they say go ahead and mix it. Well, I just wondered if you get the total benefit. You don't get the total benefit.
You don't get the total benefit. I mean, if you look at those samples, and assuming we pulled enough samples at least to get an idea what's going on. Good year. Here's all our straight BMRs sampled for fiber digestibility, ranked from number 1 to 112. All the straight BMRs clearly are awesome forage. And then you get into some of the blends which are in red there, and some of them come up in the top 20. That's good. That's a good number, but maybe it's because of the sample. Maybe I got mostly BMR in my little baggie. And maybe, down at 77. I guess maybe the point is here, none of the blends we sampled, even with bad sampling, were in the 80 to 112 rank. What's that? What about? Oh, I think you can get a good blend in the mixer wagon. I mean, sampling is a crapshoot of this much feed. A mixer wagon full or a cow's worth, I don't worry about it. And I've had people blend BMR in the pile with 20, 30, 50% conventional and have pretty good years. So I wouldn't be afraid to do that. Back row.
So if you use this and you feed your own heifers and dry cows, use all one pile?
That's a great question. The question is about if you use this and you got heifers and dry cows, can you feed all out of one pile? You can, but you got to use a lot of straw and a lot of junk on dry cows and heifers with this, and you're probably not getting your money out of it. I've never had a problem with dry cows and heifers gaining enough weight / getting enough energy out of their feed. It's dairy cows where the challenge is. I mean, so my answer to you, and I don't even know where mycogen stands on this, but my answer to you would be have a separate plan for young stock and dry cows. The way you get your money out of this is milk.
Do you see any difference in the moisture content of the silage for BMR versus traditional? Do you think the BMR needs to be a little wetter or drier than traditional?
That's a good question that I've asked myself in the last year. I had one BMR go a little fingernail polish remover on me, and it was very wet, so we discussed it with the mycogen people and thought maybe we go just a little bit drier this year. In general, you don't like to go drier on corn silage because I don't care what variety you've got, what your genes are, you're going to get less digestibility that way. But I would stay away from silages over 70% moisture. I had my druthers, I'd shoot for 68. That's just sort of field experience, nothing researched or anything like that, no papers read. That's my gut feeling on it.
What about length of cut?
Length of cut? Oh, you guys, you're always farmers, aren't you? And I'm going to say, I want it nice and long, and then you're going to say what? Doesn't pack as good that way. Yeah, BMR is a little mushier. You probably have a lot more success with the longer cut on BMR than you will on anything else. And it'll actually, one of my clients noted this. He said, that stuff's different. It's a different duck. Because they're driving up over the pile, the apron of that pile, it just gets driven on forever. And he had a conventional pile that year. He said, look at this BMR where I've driven over it and over it and over it. It's just destroyed. It's literally mush. It's applesauce where the conventional held up. So you need to go longer and err on the side of long. I'm not going to give you a number. Longer than you think. Longer than you're comfortable packing it. It'll pack okay.
What about setting your crimper on your job?
Oh, man. You know what? You guys have to go on a tour. The question is about setting your crimper. I got into this consulting business because I wasn't sure I could tell a John Deere from an international harvester, and you're asking me about crimpers. I think you still got to set it. Don't think you don't. I had one situation in Minnesota this year. Got drier than we thought, faster than we thought. BMR's in the pile. 50% dry matter. No, pack's good. Mold was least of my concerns with that silage. Actually, digestibility wasn't top 10, but it wasn't bad. Biggest problem was crimper was off. Got whole kernels going through the cows for who knows how long. So don't ignore that.
The reason I asked my question about moisture is it was our first year last year, and of course we're skeptical. We went every other row on the planter, so we were sure that it got blended good in the bump. And we planted the same maturity days, basically, and BMR looked as dry, but when we chopped it, it wasn't. It pulled just
Yep.
eyeball in it. And
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if you do blend, should you plant an earlier BMR than the other one, maybe to get the moistures the same?
Possibly. You can all hear that? BMR will fool you. It's not as wet. It's not as dry as it looks. I think regardless of moisture content, though, at the same moisture and the same packing density, you're going to get more leachate with BMR because of the sugar. Don't let that freak you out. It's pretty normal. Those of you who have put BMR in a pile and seen the leachate come out of it, appreciate the first clients of mine in the early 90s that put it in upright silos. We'd collect the juice with 5-gallon pails and feed them to the cows. Come running down the chute for months. Last slide. Thanks for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to speak to dairymen from all over the country. Hope you have a great tour today. Appreciate you getting up, staying awake to listen to some guy from Minnesota. Thanks a bunch.